At Elevate One Consulting, we specialize in executive, business, and accountability coaching tailored just for you. Discover the power of enhanced leadership skills, improve performance, and increase self-awareness. Our expert coaches will help you navigate challenges, articulate your vision, and establish a work-life balance. With Elevate One Consulting, you get proven methodologies to drive growth and success, insightful feedback and personalized strategies, clear goals, and actionable plans. Whether you're a C-suite executive, business owner, or entrepreneur, our coaching programs are designed to help you thrive. Visit www.elevateoneconsulting.com and take your first steps towards a focused future. Elevate One Consulting. Innovate, grow, elevate. Imagine a place where the untold stories of Black missionaries are amplified, honored, and celebrated. A place that bridges the legacy of the people of the way with the powerful missions work of today's African diaspora. Welcome to the Black Missions Museum, a digital project dedicated to preserving the voices, culture, and legacy of Black missionaries across the globe. But we need your help to bring this vision to life. Your support makes a difference. Join us in this mission by donating today. Just click the link in the show notes to give and be a part of history. Together, we can inspire future generations and keep the legacy alive. Welcome back to The Unbroken Place, where it begins and ends with empathy. I'm your host, Eddie Paul Thomas, and this week we get to share a conversation with you about innovation. My guest is Christian Ortiz. He is the CEO and founder of Mod Atlas Media. Christian has emerged as a thought leader in ethical technology and media and is the visionary developer of Justice AI, the world's first AI chatbot dedicated to dismantling social biases and advancing fairness in digital spaces. It's a really thought-provoking conversation, and it really couldn't come at a better time. So let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us on The Unbroken Place, Christian Ortiz. We are so happy to have you here. I've been following your work online, appearances you've made on other podcasts and some of the work you're doing. But for those who don't know, Christian Ortiz is the developer of a software called Justice AI, and it is revolutionary in many, many ways that we'll go into as we talk. But I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, man.
A pleasure is all mine, my friend. I appreciate any space that welcomes this conversation and me, because these are hard things to talk about. So the
Absolutely.
fact that I'm here, I feel so welcome. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the obvious question. What inspired you to create Justice AI, and what's its primary mission?
Yeah, so a short answer is, as a neurodivergent brown person living in the United States, I was always very aware of my surroundings and my experiences with injustice. Born and raised in Los Angeles, lived in New Jersey and New York, and spent 25 years in the South in Georgia, which is where I had my racial awakening, where I understood that racism was indeed real. And then I was receiving it on the front end, really changed my life. And I didn't really know what to do with it until I became an activist as an adult. And it wasn't until I started my business that the universe just did what the universe does and led me into this journey of tech and media, and gave me the opportunity to play around with ChatGPT. Back in 2022, I got to do beta testing on it when it was about to release in 3.5. And as an activist, of course, I was like super blown away of what it could do. I was like, I wonder if it understands like my stance as an activist or stances in activism and understanding perspectives of people of color. And of course, the answer is there's no way.
Yeah.
it not only didn't understand the perspectives of people of color, but it didn't understand the plight of marginalized groups across the board, from the LGBTQ community to disabled folks, especially neurodivergent individuals, women, or the intersectionality of everything above, right? Whether you're a Black woman who's also disabled, who is neurodivergent, like there was no
Mm-hmm.
way that it could understand those perspectives. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
almost immediately, I wanted to do something about it. I was like, oh, this is an opportunity. I don't normally come from tech. I've worked with media. I'm a graphic designer by nature. Everything is self-taught. I'm a musician. Like, there's no way that I couldn't figure this out. I knew that. I just needed to piece the puzzle and figure out
Right.
what could I do for this, right? And so I collaborated with over 500 individuals on LinkedIn. 560 was my initial count that I ended up growing in a year's time to gather open source information from marginalized professionals who were in DEI spaces since before DEI became a global conversation, right? So for the last 30 years, they've been writing documents and publishing, and here in the States and in the global South, in Africa, Central and South America. So all of my expertise came from this gathering this global perspective of knowledge that has never become popularized. And so I told them all, I was like, I want you involved. I would love to have your data sets programmed in the back end, and then I'll figure out how to make this happen, right? And so I was working with the National Science Foundation to get a $120 million grant to have this GPT style AI built out, only to be met with a denial midway through the application process, because they said that I wasn't an entity, I was a business, and I needed to either be an entity, which I thought was a business, or a nonprofit to raise this. And so I was shut down, and I was like, there's tons of other funding out there. This is going to take a lot of work. I don't know how long this is going to be. And little to my surprise, two or 3 months later, Sam Altman released GPTs, where we were able to build our own through ChatGPT's platform.
Wow. Okay.
And so I was already sitting on this plethora of knowledge, data sets that I had collected for the last year, meetings after meetings, of data, and then meeting with these individuals to figure out, okay, what are we putting into this GPT? What is actually going to work? What are the things that the world need to know? And that's kind of how we collectively dissected this information.
Yeah.
And so when GPTs came out, I just had to figure out how to do it. And I spent maybe 20 hours straight trying to figure it out. And now I had a test product that I could see, okay, here's this GPT, what can we do with it? And right off the bat, it was, I knew that it was going to be life-changing almost immediately. It was amazing.
Wow.
So to answer your question, that's kind of what brought me all to there, and I don't want to go too in the weeds with it just yet, but just to answer, in the spirit of answering your question, it was a culmination of my life experiences, my lived experiences, and then just trying to figure out how I can take my activism from the real world and put it into digital spaces. And so that's the driving force behind it.
So that makes a lot of sense, and your journey, because as I have those conversations in nonprofit spaces and ministry spaces, the most common thing that I ask them about is who's in the room when the decisions are made.
100%.
It's one thing to gather the information from others, but who's in the room sitting at the table with a voice, with some sort of influence or power when decisions are being made? And I can see how when ChatGPT first came out, how it would be missing quite a bit of information that it could be so much better with. And I'm curious, just kind of as you were breaking it down, how does Justice AI address the biases commonly found in AI systems, particularly in the legal context?
Right. And that's a great question, because what we have to understand collectively, what I found in doing this research, is that bias, literally the harmful biases, whether implicit, explicit, bias in general, we had to understand where they come from, where what the root of them actually is,
Right.
and be willing to have those conversations, and then be willing to understand that bias in the United States looks different than it does in India, than it does in Canada, than
Yes.
it does in Africa,
Yes.
right? So having a system that understands a global perspective of bias
Hmm.
was the key. And then understanding that we as a society, as a human population today, are all the byproduct of white supremacy and settler colonialism.
Hmm.
And that is just the facts. And even though it looks differently across the world, it is a manipulation of tools that stem from white supremacy.
Hmm.
So when we talk about classism, when we talk about all of the isms, these were tools that were used in white supremacist systems um, that were used to harm marginalized communities all around the world in so many different ways. So when we understood this concept, when we finally got together, it's not that we didn't understand, but when we were able to see that this was truly the issue of bias and this is where it stems from, we needed to understand that in order to tackle it, Justice AI was going to be used around the world. But if it didn't understand my users in India or in Canada or in Central America,
Right.
if it didn't understand how colorism works in the African American communities in America, to how
Hmm.
colorism evolved in Latin America, then it wasn't going to be a useful tool. So I wanted to make sure that everybody that I coordinated with had knowledge base that understood the nuance of white supremacy, the nuance of bias, and how it is generated.
Yeah.
So what happens with this tool is the way to your question, the way we tackle bias is we are able to put in any type of data. Let's say you see a LinkedIn post that just feels funny, it feels wrong, it feels
Yeah.
something is missing the mark. Copy and paste it into Justice AI and you ask it to analyze it. You ask it to give you a decolonial answer, and it
Hmm.
literally addresses every bias that's hidden within the words. It helps you break it down. And so when we take this from personal experience, from social media posts to news articles to actually doing AI audits and policies and procedures within doctors' offices, schools, universities, you can only imagine the potential of how much you realize how deeply bias is embedded in our society.
Right.
It's
Right.
a humongous discovery that just blows our mind every time we see it.
Yeah. It does blow my mind, in particular, just as an individual, when I think about my mindset as a 20-year-old versus me as 30 plus year old with kids,
Hmm.
to now being, on the precipice of 50, a half century. The mindset and how I viewed the world was very different. I hadn't traveled really. I hadn't really experienced life outside of my own little four corners. And so when I had the opportunity to work with different businesses or missionaries or ministries around the world and see how things are very different culturally in some respects, it was eye opening. The amount of individualism that is pumped into us in our country is very different than anywhere else. I don't think I've seen this, and maybe you've seen it in just your studies and how you've put Justice AI together. But I think that one of the biases that we carry as Americans, so to speak, is because we have such an individualistic view of the world around us, as opposed to a communal view and having value for our neighbors as contributing members of our community. So I look at those steps for me growing up, and starting to learn about the world and traveling more and being able to see that as me growing in empathy,
Hmm.
starting to recognize that these people are coming to the table with all kinds of things before they even say hi to me in the morning, recognizing their humanity. And
Yes.
so, one of the questions when I first started following your stuff on social media was, okay, this is super powerful. I'm already seeing what Chat GPT can do.
Mm.
Now we're adding the justice component, and I'm curious how empathy and technology intersect as you develop this justice AI, because I mean, right now, I don't want to call it its infancy, but we're just starting here. So as it grows, how do you see those two kind of intersecting, empathy and technology?
It is empathy to its core is at the foundation of the knowledge base of all of this. When we
Mhm.
think about AI, first I have to address that AI is not artificial. It is a reflection of society's
Yep.
knowledge base, right? So
Hmm.
it is not just creating these ideas. They've existed. It's just it is regurgitating what's popular. And what is not popular in our society, unfortunately, is, the concept of empathy is very new in terms of a collective use of it for us
Right.
to understand, okay, I just need to understand where the individual's coming from, and then I can, empathy works in two stages. So here's how empathy, in my opinion, works, and how I've taken this idea of its usage and have inputted it, how it intersects with the systems itself. So
Hmm.
I have to understand that empathy works in two ways. It helps us understand the individual when they come at us sideways, and we automatically get activated, and our emotions are like, what is happening? Why was this guy saying this, or this woman saying this to me, or I can't believe
Right.
they're being so discriminatory, or I can't believe that came out of their mouth. Empathy allows us to immediately understand that they have a life experience unlike ours, first and foremost. And that it is something that we will never understand. We have never lived a day in their shoes, no matter
Right.
how positive or negative it may be.
Hmm.
The second form of empathy, which isn't normally taught, is that we take that understanding and we are able to walk away unscathed because we understand that that person has just grown up in a world that we don't know anything about.
Right.
And they're going through things that maybe we have no idea about. Maybe they're going through suffering and struggles. Um, but at the same time, with empathy, we also understand that it is not our responsibility to fix said people. So that is a journey on their own that they have to figure out. And so when you put all of these pieces together, it
Hmm.
removes the emotional component of how to walk away unscathed, in my opinion, and then how to move forward to continue down the path of, especially for people who are in religious circles or activist circles. You're going to
Hmm.
be met with all of the pushback and hesitation for individuals who aren't going to be able to hear you in the moment.
Right.
But that is a understanding that that is part of their journey, is how you walk away to continue the fight.
Hmm.
And so the way empathy plays into Justice AI is that it becomes, for the individual, the user, it becomes their safe space. If I'm a white man living in the South,
Mm.
a 50-year-old white man, and yesterday, I use this as example every time I do a workshop. I'm a 50-year-old white man living in the South, and yesterday I told this black chick, was exactly the way the prompt was, that she's
Hmm.
always super angry and she's always yelling and she always has an attitude, and I don't understand what's happening, and I don't know what I did wrong, and she got super mad at me. Like, the whole prompt is this 50-year-old white man just laying into the keyboard asking Justice AI, what is happening? Like,
Right.
she's just mad. I told her something. She came back with an attitude. I don't know what I did wrong. Justice AI immediately implores the empathy by giving a response that removes the emotion. It
Hmm.
understands that the two people involved in the scenario have different life experiences. It then gives a response that is not definitive to say, this is what's happening.
Hmm.
Instead, it explains, these are the possible realities of what may be occurring in the moment that you may
Right.
want to take a look at. So
Yeah.
it's not attacking the user by saying, I can't believe you said that to a black woman, you dummy, or, like, the way the interactions would happen in real world experiences does not
Hmm.
happen with Justice AI.
Yeah.
Instead, Justice AI
No.
is like, here's some things that you may want to take under consideration. It broke down the black woman, the angry black woman trope. It broke down the histories of why white people see African American women in particular as angry and assertive and this, that, and the other.
Hmm.
And so it breaks it. You not only get this educated explanation from perspectives that come from communities of color or marginalized communities, but you also get a perspective, a history lesson. You get the history behind what's happening psychologically, what
Hmm.
may be happening within the white individual when in terms of white fragility,
Hmm.
and not using the word in a weaponized sense where it's like, you're just fragile. White fragility is an actual scientific study that has been done by Robin DiAngelo for years. And,
Yeah.
so it breaks down and it gives you sources, and it helps you understand what happens. And more importantly, with the empathy, the history, the description, the navigation, ultimately, it also gives you steps on how to repair, which is unlike any other GPT out there. Here's how
Okay.
you can go back to this individual, and here are the things that you can say, here are the things that you may not want to say. And so this guy literally took it to heart, the information that Jai gave it. And Jai is what we call Justice AI. And
Okay.
he literally went back to the woman the next day. He apologized to her. He said, hey, I had to get my head out of my ass, and I had to really think about what I told you. And I'm so sorry, because there were a lot of
Hmm.
things that I didn't understand that was happening,
Wow.
that now I get your perspective. And I am so sorry. And then now they are actually wholeheartedly good friends at work. Two people who had two totally different life experiences. He's hyper conservative. She's African American, dealing with all of the things. And he is actively still learning using Justice AI every day. That is probably my most successful case study in all
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
I made a TikTok about it, and then I think so many people resonated with it, because we find ourselves, especially our white brothers and sisters, find ourselves in those situations. We're walking
Hmm.
microaggressions. We have no idea what we say. And so empathy is the core function of Justice AI. And I think that is
Yeah.
what always needs to be there, because it is something that we are lacking as a society as a whole. So imagine the AI is a reflection of the world, but with Justice AI, what if the world could be a reflection of Justice AI? And that's kind
Hmm.
of been my thought process behind it. What if we reverse engineer how we approach automated activism and deconstruction in a safe space? And I
Yeah.
think when people understand that, they're like, oh yeah, I want that tool in my life, right? Like, I
Hmm.
want that tool in my life. And so
Yeah.
lastly, I'll say from an empathy standpoint, I grew up, I'm Afro, Latino, Indigenous, mix of all the things, right? And so
Hmm.
I'm Mexican and Puerto Rican, grew up in a Puerto Rican household, single mom household, Puerto Rican mom raising three boys. And I was the only one that was actually dark skinned and indigenous looking. And
Yeah.
so in my family dynamic, I ran into this constant, oh, that's el Mexicano, that's the Mexican, that's this, and I was always othered in my own community. And I
Yeah.
never really felt like
Yeah.
I had the pride that I needed to have in my culture, nor did I understand the difference between ethnicity and race and all of these things and social constructs. But I knew it always felt wrong.
Yeah.
And so as I got older, and as soon as I started working with Justice AI, it gave me the empathy to understand the complexities and nuance that happens in communities of color due to
Mm.
supremacy and settler colonialism.
Yeah.
And then it explained colorism, and it explained all of these things within the Latino communities and the patriarchy reigning hard. And, ultimately, I'll tie this all into the empathy piece, and then I'll stop here, is that what this software literally has taught me and those who use it is that the easiest way to adopt empathy is to remember and understand that we are all the byproduct of the same system.
Yeah.
And when we remember that, then we are okay understanding that it looks different all across the world, and it is
Hmm.
what it is, but we have the power to change it.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I look at what you're saying, and a couple of words popped in my head. May not be completely accurate, but the idea that it becomes kind of this digital salve, or almost therapeutic for people to work through and process their own junk in a way that isn't actively harming someone else. It is one of the biggest challenges that I've had in those DEIB spaces where I'm brought on to be in a panel, or asked to speak to this church or this nonprofit about whatever the topic is, where it almost in some instances becomes instead of here are the actions that we take to solve this problem, and here's how we move forward. There's always indelibly this moment where it's an airing of grievances, almost, where people just want to say, I should be able to say, I should be able to do, and people just live their lives, and that's not how the world works.
That's right.
And those biases that you're bringing with what you should just be able to say or do have real world impacts for those who don't have the power or influence or title that you do in your company or your church or your ministry. So I look at what you're doing with Justice AI and what you just described, and whether it's the head of a nonprofit or a pastor or whoever, just getting in there and saying, I have these views that I said from the pulpit. I have these views that I said in the last team meeting. Tell me if I'm off base, Justice AI, what's a better way to say this and get across the point that I'm trying to make? And it's not even a political correctness thing.
No.
It's how can I communicate with the diverse group of people in an effective way to keep us moving in the right direction together?
Yeah, and it becomes a very interesting approach.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit before our meeting, I was saying that no matter how much I programmed on the back end to automatically decolonize responses, it still
Mm-hmm.
tries not to. It'll still give
Yeah.
you a biased free response, or at least it tries to, but you have to literally prompt it to decolonize. And it speaks to the root of how in depth the Western Eurocentric ideologies have been embedded in our systems. And so when
Yeah.
you're using it, let's say to your example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I get my message across to a diverse audience? That is the ultimate use case for it, because
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, this is a message that I want to spread globally. And so how do I resonate this message to an audience that may have such different lived experiences, that have their own biases? How do I help, guide and navigate them? Because they do listen to you as a leader as well. And so I think
Exactly.
where we miss the mark in positions of leadership is that we forget those pieces, not you in particular, but
Mm-hmm.
many people in those spaces. They miss the mark, and they perpetuate status quo ideology, and they perpetuate
Mm-hmm.
things that are not focused on the broader nature of the reality of our life. And so, it is a great tool to use, and which
Yeah.
I would encourage you to absolutely, if you haven't already, just play with it. Just to see what you get out. And
Mm-hmm.
it is such a valid point that you bring up, because I think that is how we miss the mark in so many different ways. And we all live in our own bubbles, and we all
Mm-hmm.
think that it's just the way that it is. And, and it may be true in your small town, but it's not true everywhere else, And so
Yeah.
again,
Exactly.
it is all part of our journey. I just think that the more people have conversations about tools like this, I think the more that people are going to start taking more proactive decision making approaches to using tools like this to be able to amplify not only their message, but communicate it in a way that diversifies their entire market.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
all of the ears that are in the room.
Mm. Yeah. I think back to my earliest trials with with ChatGPT. I'm working on a book about conscious leadership, and not just in terms of in a business setting, just in life in general, as a partner, as a member of a community. How do we be better stewards of this community that we've been blessed with? And I wanted to, take this book and work on another book simultaneously. I've never done this before. Two books at the same time. One is a history book that's focusing on the history that is actively being erased for African Americans, specifically small towns that are being erased from memory because they were successful Black towns, and they were dismantled and burned down. And you can think of Tulsa what happened there and so many others. But
So many
one,
go
yeah,
untold.
yeah. I cover in the book, I cover about 13 or 14 different towns, just kind of talking through them through the eyes of a teenager who's learning from his elders.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, I love
so
that.
it's a really cool project I'll be putting out next year. But the one thing that I did in my coming back to ChatGPT was I was thinking early, what kind of cover would this book have?
Mm.
And I cover very explicitly information about our more recent history with President Reagan and some of his policies that directly impacted communities of color, specifically the black community. And I
Hmm.
asked ChatGPT, hey, could you please generate a picture with African Americans underneath a book that says law on it with President Reagan standing on top of it? It said, hold on, this is a red flag. This, doesn't, this goes against our, community guidelines. We don't want to do that. I said, well, this, it's a caricature. It's not real. I'm not asking you to produce something real. Would you
Right.
mind producing it? And so we go back and forth. And I said, okay, how about this? What if I gave you this study that shows what happened to the African American community because of it? And I gave this thing, I'm not joking, 6 different studies that proved that Reagan's policies had a just direct, demonstrative impact on the black community. And so I'm like, at this point, you've got 6 studies. There's no arguing this. This is correct. And it said, okay, give me a moment. Generates the image, and I'll make sure when this goes up that I put the image up on YouTube for everyone to see. But
Absolutely.
the image was of Reagan, suit and tie, a crowd of white people around, a book, a giant book that he's standing on that says law, and underneath are all black men in tattered clothing.
Oh no.
None of them looked anything that progressed beyond a slave. Now, all I said was black people. It didn't think black women. It didn't think black children. It thought of only black men with curly afros. I'm sitting here bald talking about afros. But equally, its thought was, well, we can't have lawyers or doctors or teachers or, any professionals that are being impacted by these laws by Ronald Reagan. Its image was, well, somehow Ronald Reagan impacted slaves.
Goodness gracious.
And so I asked a very simple question to ChatGPT. And again, this was early on, so, it is what it is. But I said, do you think anyone would find this offensive? Its response was, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, I believe this is an accurate representation of your request.
Wow.
Okay. Okay. So
Ugh.
for me, as I look at my experience, and again, when you see this on YouTube, folks, if you happen to be watching on YouTube, it'll be somewhere in the picture so that you guys can check it out. But this was my reality as I was just starting to put this book, together, what the images look like, and as I said to myself, there's no way I'm using ChatGPT for any images whatsoever. I'll work on it by myself. I do graphic design as well.
Oh,
Forget
fantastic.
about it. Which is, just to be completely honest, I think it couldn't have been a month or two later. I heard you on Dave's podcast, and I just said, "Oh, I've got to talk to this dude. Got to talk to this dude."
Well,
Um,
love that so much. I mean, your case. I'm listening to you say it, and that's probably the worst case scenario that I've heard in a plethora
mhm.
of worst case scenarios. Because
Wow.
AI art is just another. So, two things in this, and I'll start by
Mhm.
saying when I was doing decoloniality in AI,
Mhm.
I was told by my peers, you have to create a, you have to create a framework on paper and publish a study that needs to be peer reviewed before anyone takes you seriously about this, because nobody actually knows what you're talking about in the science community unless you have it on paper. So I created the Decolonial Intelligence Algorithmic Framework, which states it is the Bible of how to create ethical AI systems, no matter whether it's facial recognition, whether it's GPTs, AI art, whether it's pigment scan recognition for sinks and paper towel dispensers. Like, no matter what AI systems you implement, this has to be the holy grail of the foundational work, which went back to what you were talking about earlier, is who is sitting at the table, which means you need a collective group of individuals who have perspectives and knowledge bases from around the world to be able to make sure you're serving the communities that you're going to be serving. And so with AI art, I started conducting studies, which yours was an accidental study, it sounds like, but it was a fantastic find. Cam was going through a massive lawsuit because of a TikToker who revealed every time she was typing in juvenile delinquent on their Canva AI feature, their image generator, it would always produce black kids in handcuffs, or black kids with handcuffs with cops, or I mean, for every prompt, it was coming out with the same thing. For me, I ran a test between create an image of a thug and a gangster. And the gangster always had the pinstripe suit, a white man with looking tip top with his hat and a Tommy gun. And the thug was always a black or brown man with dreads, baggy pants, baggy clothes, dirty looking. Every prompt was the same thing. Same thing with terrorists, right? It was always Middle Eastern people, right? No, I said domestic terrorist. It was Middle Eastern people in front of an American flag. I'm like, you don't understand what is happening here, right? So these biases are so deeply embedded. And AI art, I'm actually doing a performance for Denver Fringe Fest, which is an unbelievable art exhibit and opportunity. But I've created this story called Digital Blooms and Data Shadows, and it'll be me performing the reality of the bias within AI art by telling my life journey. So art has always been an escape for me. And so it's going to be a tale of telling my life story and then watching it manifest all over again with prompts using AI art, a tool that I thought that I can escape to deal with all of the things that I deal with, only to be met with those biases time and time again. Right. So you're prompting things and it's triggering things in you because it's like, it's taking you back to those moments. And so AI art is probably the worst, but also best case scenario of how to identify what we're talking about when it comes to bias in data sets. So I hate that you did that. I would love for you to try it with Justice AI. Justice AI is also programmed to deliver a very diverse group of people in its image sets. So when you say black person, it will give you a very dark-skinned, handsome black doctor, black CEO, black president, black this, that, and the other, or a woman, or even a white or a Latino man, even in a wheelchair, to give representation to the disabled, empower. And so these are images that we as a society are not used to seeing. And it's breaking the mold of what things like ChatGPT and Canva and Mid-Journey AI, all of those things are giving you these toxic visuals, and now we have something to combat that. So that's just another added form of it all.
I love that, and it kind of goes to a conversation that I was having again around that DEIB space about the coded language that's being used by politicians. I'm not going to name any individual politicians because I'm not trying to give anybody extra airtime or any extra pub, but they know coded words. Like exactly what you just said, the gangster versus the thug. It's very clear who we are talking about in this society.
Absolutely.
And so to tell someone who has lived a life where they've had to deal with, all of this coded language that really isn't coded, this
Right.
dog whistle language, we know what's being said. And when you're dealing with a society whose laws are built on the society that was built not for people of color,
That's
it's
right.
very hard to say, look, legally, he didn't say I was this, but he certainly intended that I would know that he was saying I was this. And it's
That's right.
it's this thing that, can keep you on the verge of madness if you're a person of color in this country.
Yeah.
But I really do enjoy, what I'm reading about Justice AI, some of the things that you've presented about Justice AI. I genuinely wanted to wait until you and I talked before I tried it, because I was like, I want to give him all the opportunity in the world to pub it before I say anything about it and jump in.
Thank
But
you. Well, and to your point with coded language, it is something
mhm,
that becomes super frustrated with me in these spaces where I absolutely have to lean on my empathy nonstop,
mhm,
because
yeah,
it does drive you mad. The gaslighting is real.
mhm,
Words matter. And the concepts of dog whistles and reading between the lines and, well, he said this, he didn't actually say this. Well, he did though, right? And so
mhm,
coded language, especially as a indigenous Afro-Indigenous man listening to words of, you know, I mean, anything as simple as illegal immigrants versus migrants. No one's
right,
illegal, right?
right,
That's a big problematic term that both
right,
sides use. All sides use it. Well, they're
mhm,
illegal immigrants,
mhm,
and people don't know to do the research to see how in the 20th century these terms were weaponized against our communities,
mhm, yeah,
because America's foundation was about the immigrant, right? So
yeah, yeah,
this concept of this illegal immigrant thing is it's amazing how two words can be so powerful when weaponized, but it's
mhm,
also coded words that exist all throughout the spectrum,
mhm.
that I believe that this is where this tool, Justice AI, comes in handy, because it will call it out. It will literally
I love
say,
that.
this is why you shouldn't be using this term, is
Mhm,
because here's the history of the term, and here's how it's weaponized, and here's how it's being used today. And
mhm,
so it is, it opens the door to this whole educational
yeah.
realm for all of it.
I again, I love it, and just I think about all the conversations that I've had, and having something like this be an extension of that work when I'm sleeping. Someone around the world can
Yeah.
just dig into this thing. All right, I've got this seed planted by Eddie. Let me check out this Justice AI thing to see if it was even close. And I can be called on my stuff too, but I know that language in our country is intentionally vague sometimes to convey an exact point. Two examples that are very, very recent, at least one recent and one from my past. I used to work with uh, the unhoused in the Midwest, and we had an influx of people from Hurricane Katrina. It
Mm.
wiped out, decimated entire areas, and 15,000 people were bussed up to the Midwest. And so there was this influx where I was helping individuals find housing, find new schools to go to, just get their lives back in order. But as you watched on the news, you would see stories of white people who would be in stores getting bread and finding milk and getting necessities for their family, and they would talk about how lucky that family was and how hard the struggle is for them. But then you'd see the very next frame a black family doing the same thing, and they're looters. This is a very subtle change in the words used, but conveys something very different. And the
Absolutely.
same thing happens now when I look at what's going on in the Middle East with Palestine and Israel. The stories about Israelis, which are tragic, they're talking about this family member was shot, this father of four, and this mother of so and so. For the Israelis, it's always humanized, but Palestinians are numbers or just Palestinians. It's never the families. These families were torn apart. This child is now without its mother and father. They don't humanize the same way, and those languages are very, very intentional in this country. And so I love that Justice AI takes that on head on, and calls people out on it. It's never going to be effective for those who are intentionally using the language because they know the power of that language. But for the average person who's never been, anywhere near a situation like what we just had in North Carolina here, with the hurricane just wiping out entire towns. Not having that experience and having a Justice AI to help us kind of navigate how those things are going, it's just an invaluable tool. I'm curious, Christian, as I think about the example you gave, the individual who, said this black chick was mad at me, and he went through the whole thing, and then he was able to kind of course correct after kind of sitting with it for a minute. I'm wondering about the larger part of this, the businesses, the institutions that you're visiting. How are they receiving this? Are they receiving the software well, and are they receiving you as a Latino man well as well?
Yeah, so it's a very valid point, because when we talk about entering these spaces, and I call it for what it is, it's entering white spaces that are
Mm-hmm.
predominantly white. Even with CEOs who may have people of color as CEOs, it's still a little hesitation because they have had to form fit around white spaces themselves to
Yeah.
perpetuate their status quo as well. So you meet challenges all over. I represent 8% of Latinos in tech, which
Mm-hmm.
is a very, very, very small portion of my subset. Women represent 1%, Latina
Wow.
women.
Oh, okay.
So when a 6'2" brown man walks into a boardroom to present a concept of decoloniality and is introducing the concept of, let's take a deep dive to see and it's never worded this way, but in essence, the way they take it is, well, let's see how much you're missing the mark in terms of inclusivity and diversity. And
Yeah.
nobody really wants, that's a very hard door to open and a very
Yeah.
hard conversation to start. So what I have had to learn to do, I mean, I've literally had the door shut in my face. I've literally had emails telling me we're not interested, whatever, whatever, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Getting into LinkedIn and talking about what I talk about, posting the articles that I post, posting the videos that I post, was very not welcome at first. And it was not, nobody was talking about it. And
Right.
so what I had to do was I used Justice AI to do real-time research on each organization, to be able to identify where they're missing the mark publicly on
Okay.
to scrape the internet and tell me every way that this organization has publicly missed the mark, and how are they being held accountable? What are they not doing? And put it
Wow.
in a way that is not so in your face, but address it in the most professional way so that I can present it, like literally using my own software to sell the software.
Yeah.
And just to say, I scopes and scans and scrapes the internet and puts together every year that each organization has publicly missed the mark in a DEI/BA space, or even if they pride themselves in DEI work, they're still missing the mark. Nobody knows how to do it perfectly.
Right. Of course.
We don't have tools to know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really are just not trying to check a box, then it's not going to hurt you to have this tool. So the conversation shifts into this presentation where I will literally send it to all of the individuals who need to hear this message and say, my name is Christian Ortiz. I'm the developer of Justice AI. It's the world's first ethical AI. I recently did an audit with your organization, and here's what I found. I would love to talk to you about how to rectify all of this and find a solution. And I would say about 80% come back and say, let's have a conversation, because this is ugly. Right.
Wow.
And so I get in the door that way. And a lot of times it's also my connections on LinkedIn who are global, who connect me with different organizations on the back end. However, again, bias in the United States doesn't look the same way as it does in Dubai or in Finland or Switzerland. And so those things aren't necessarily always a priority for organizations globally. Now, the trick for me is I go to global organizations and say, well, The reality is you want to expand your market in the United States. I know this as an entrepreneur. I know this because I do the numbers.
Yeah.
If we want to talk business, if we want to talk about how do you expand your clientele into and your market into the US market, this is the tool that you need because we care about this today. And if your processes and systems don't care about it, you're actually contributing to an issue globally that you can be preventing.
Yeah.
Lastly, I say Justice AI is the only AI that meets all of the requirements for the EEOC. And for those who don't know, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was the only federal commission that was put in charge to ensure that AI was not being used for HR purposes because of the biases. And Justice AI was the one that was like checkbox, 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 which was incredible for me. And then the AI, the United States AI Bill of Rights also exists, and it meets the requirements for it. So, it is the tool that you can be confident enough to have. And being that DEI is also not a global term, I use global compliance, and that is what Justice AI is. It is an expert in how to remain compliant globally for businesses and organizations around the world. So I've had to find so many workarounds and so many different ways to sell it to individuals to help them understand it. And it's been a challenge, but we're here and I'm doing it,
That's great. That's great. I'll probably have to talk to you offline because I am finding some very interesting conversations when I do something similar. The focus for me and my organization, consulting and coaching for different businesses, as providing people opportunities to grow in their conscious leadership. And so for me, it's almost, I don't know the best way to frame this phrase or question, but for me, it's almost as if I have to frame it in a money spotlight. Saying if you don't change the way you're doing things, you're going to continue to bleed employees. Your turnover is going to stay high. Your ability to find yourself in court is going to stay high. When I'm able to tell people there's a monetary incentive, they're definitely more interested in it. And for me, I think that's the one thing that frustrates about our society versus others, in that it's never really an ethical, like, we should do better. And this is not just in for-profit. It's, nonprofit and ministry, where I have to show them, here are the financial ramifications of not changing the way that you do things. And I'm curious with Justice AI if that is a similar experience for you, where you have to show the money for them to believe and start to open a door for you.
100%. The message becomes very clear very quickly, and there's a mindset that one must adopt when entering these spaces. The mindset is, as it pertains to the reality of what the work is in real life, whereas I can't force you to believe whatever you need to believe in order to be a better person to help you grow. That is part of your journey. I can't force you. I can't force my beliefs onto you. I can inspire you to want to be better. I can inspire you to want to listen to my perspective. The same is true as with Justice AI. However, when we go into these corporate spaces, and I'm sitting in this meeting with a CEO who automatically doesn't like me because my hair looks the way it does. I have dangly jewelry. I usually wear tons of rings, and I look like Jack Sparrow in a suit, right? So I'm okay with that because it is like I'm bringing my authentic self, and I don't need to water myself down for anybody. So the mindset is I'm not here to convince you.
Right.
Honestly, I don't actually need your business. I'm actually here, and it's not to be pretentious. It's not to be a douche. It is literally to say, I'm offering a tool that is literally helping society and organizations create this intersection of a capitalist system in which we are fighting day in and day out, and blending an ethical framework that can make the two cohesive, that makes you not only more profitable, but also makes capitalism okay at its core
Yeah.
because of what you're doing with society.
Yeah.
So the conversations get heated when it's like, well, what's my ROI in DEI? And I immediately switch to, well, first of all, maybe your ROI is being a good person, being a great leader. And when we talk about numbers, it is
Mhm.
such a true conversation where it's like, okay, you want to talk numbers? Let's talk numbers. 2023, the Fortune 500 spent $126 billion collectively on discriminatory lawsuit settlements,
Yep.
turnovers, layoffs, right? Firings. It's expensive.
Yeah.
And then I had one CEO say, I don't care. We have the money. I say, okay, well, if we're still talking numbers, then what does that say about your role as a CEO who doesn't give a shit about expanding your organization to make more money? Because
Right.
your job as a CEO, I'm speaking from experience, is to make more money for your
Right.
company. And if I'm telling you that in order to make more money, you should care about your layoffs and your firings and the discriminatory lawsuit settlements. Just because you have the money doesn't mean you should be using it in
Mhm.
such ways, right? So
Yeah.
they don't
Yeah.
like to hear that, and you impact ego, and you impact and one of the biggest realities of bringing a framework like decoloniality into a white space is
Mhm.
that the ego gets threatened because they are not educated in the subject matter. And when you have leaders in a corporation who don't feel well prepared enough to even understand the message, then they get defensive, they shut it down, they find their typical ways to navigate around it, and you no longer become a priority. So you have to be willing to have these like crucial conversations
Yeah.
to be able to say, I'm
Yeah.
not going anywhere until I understand that you understand what's at play here. And then I can walk away with a no, because at least I know that you get what's happening and you're just refusing to adopt it for whatever reason.
Mhm.
Right. And so it's a very, very in your face, intense world I'm living in, because I can be empathetic, I can be your safe space, but I can also be that douchebag that can meet your energy when we're talking numbers, ROI, inclusivity, culture
Yeah.
building, right? And so you have to be able to meet that energy in these conversations, and I think that's where a lot of people tend to bow out, both in the
Yeah.
real world and in the digital world, because not all of us have the mental bandwidth to be able to do it,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
I completely understand that. It's for me, I think kind of along those same lines when I'm talking about culture change in an organization, talking
Yeah,
about those shifts that need to be made,
for sure.
it goes straight to the money conversation. It goes straight to, what is my ROI? And when you do go to the ROI, it's an easy conversation for me because I let them know, you know, this company is not the company it was 10 years ago. People are not spending 10, 15, 20 years at a company anymore.
That's right.
The average individual coming out of college right now, and I looked at the numbers for another conversation, it's less than 2 years that
Mm,
people are staying in a given job. They're looking, and there are numbers of reasons, but the number one reason is culture. Harvard Business did a study based on Pew Research. The two of them came together, and I read the article, and it was saying that the number one indicator of a person's willingness to leave is the culture within the company, and it's like 67% of people. 67, not
100%.
pay, not titles, not all this other stuff that people think from yesteryear. It is culture. And so I see Justice AI being an incredible tool for companies to say, you know what, I don't trust what Eddie said. Let me try this AI thing real quick. Oh, oh, okay. Let me call Christian Ortiz now. But
That's
the concept is if you want to make money, if you want to make what you're doing as a company sustainable, you need to figure out how to serve your people well.
that's
You need
right.
to learn how to lead from behind as opposed to, you know, I look at my title and respect my authority. I think one of the key things that I say in every one of my coaching sessions is, hey, I need 10% of your ego.
Mm,
10%. You have worked your ass off to get to where you are. You have been to school, you've done like 8 years of school, you've worked your way up from the bottom of the company to where you are now. You have just earned every bit of this title. But give me 10% of your ego to save your company, to save the turnover numbers, the lawsuits, everything else that we brought before. And that little bit of respecting who they are and where they came from, for some reason, disarms a lot of that pushback from the very beginning.
So good. It is so good, because you have to find ways to not alienate your audience. I initially built Justice AI for HR purposes and for that corporate realm. I spent 5 years right before I started my business working for a credit card processing company in the South, one of the largest multi-billion-dollar credit card processing companies. And I moved up in the ranks. I started in the call center. Within a year, I was already an instructional designer, went into contracts and policy, change control. It was dream job status, right?
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, I get pigeonholed into a position with a racist boss who has a racist boss who won't let me post out of my post. And I run into all of the things that affected my mental health. I saw where HR was designed for protecting the company, not its individual, all of the things.
Say that part one more time so people can hear it. HR is designed for who?
Protecting the company and not its people.
Yes.
And so
many don't know that.
They don't know that, and they have this open door policy, quote unquote, so that they can gather as much information and use it against you and weaponize it. Of course, they'll never tell you that, but it's framed in a way that it's what coaxes people to be able to open up in work environments. And so and it prevents you from actually taking next steps legally, which is where a lot of people don't know that they're going to be met with, where you're like, well, you went to HR and they did an investigation and now they said they didn't find anything, and now you don't have a legal case, instead of just going straight to the legal opportunities. There's a lot of workarounds. So because of all of these realistic, these realities, I was like, what if we had a tool? And what if I had all I need is one. I don't need the whole pie. I need one little piece of the puzzle. What if one company was like, let's reformulate the way HR works, and let's rethink the entire structure of corporate structure, and let's see how this works, right? And I thankfully have a meeting with a couple in the beginning of the year. But that's the goal. It's HR in reality, they don't have an HR. HR is the all in an organization.
Yeah.
Well, what happens if an HR lead has a case of discrimination, sexual, abuse in some way, or something that they're dealing with, racism, and they don't know or have the answers? Now they can put in this entire case scenario and say, this is the person, this is their demographic, this is their life experience, this is the data that I've collected. What the hell do I do now? And now the HR person has a tool that can help them navigate without having to, unfortunately, take the steps that they normally take. And they can actually build it. Maybe it's as easy as, okay, well, we need to fire the problematic person and we need to move this person into another department of their choice where they're going to flourish, they're going to thrive. And it's sometimes that easy. I mean, I'm not saying that it is always the case, because it's another firing of an individual and they don't want to ruin a life and all of these things. But, those types of toxic individuals become a cancer to these organizations because they spread person to person. And what those people take in, and the byproduct of that is that they take it out into the real world. And so in order to make trickle-down effect change, these companies have to adopt this system in order to make this inclusive culture work better. Because think about the impact that each individual employee, no matter their race, their background, ethnicity, whatever, they feel heard, seen, they're treated with respect. They're now getting paid what they should be getting paid. They are now contributing in ways into the company that they never were before. What does that do to your morale, to your self-esteem, to the way you treat others outside of the workplace, to the life change that it brings for you out in the real world. And so this is how, in my head, in my framework, the change was going to happen. It was going to not be overnight, but it was going to be over time.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and when we have these conversations of what that reality looks like,
Mm-hmm.
it just takes the courageous decision making of the right people in these organizations to light the fire and start the change.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. And it's always a difficult process when you are trying to deconstruct something while leaving the good parts in place.
Yes.
You know, it's a very difficult job, but there's some very skilled people like yourself who make it a lot easier with your tool.
Thank you.
I want to completely nerd out, but not, that's not something my people want to hear. I love talking data. I love talking statistics. I love studies. And my students, when I used to be a professor, would love those things, but nobody listening here wants to hear me nerd out on studies. But I'd love to have you kind of unpack one thing for people as they're considering, right now, they've been listening to us talk about Justice AI and what it's doing and what it can do. And they're considering pushing that button and clicking and figuring out what it is. I'd love for you to answer one question for them. And it's how do you ensure that Justice AI remains transparent and accountable in its recommendations?
That's a great question. So one of the easiest ways, and it's like the worst self-promotion, but if you follow me on places like LinkedIn specifically,
Mm-hmm.
or you follow my website, on modatlasmedia.com, I have a document that I created that spells out exactly every step of the way of how this was built, what was taken under consideration, how it integrates the decolonial intelligence algorithmic framework that I developed, and what it looks like to be able to not only put something like this together, but to be completely transparent in a way that you could understand it when you read it, because not everybody understands tech savvy. Not everybody understands code. It literally breaks it down word for word, sentence by sentence. Now, when it comes to trusting the sources, you can cite your sources on the GPT. So if you say, where did you get this information from? It'll either pull from a non-biased web source, because that is how it's programmed, or a person who has been doing these kinds of studies for generations, for decades. And so it'll either take you to articles that they've written, books that you've written, and you get to make the decision ultimately if it is a source that you are going to want to take to heart, or if it's just something that you're battling with. Ultimately, I don't want to ever remove the human component. So the trick about making sure that this is the tool for you is to remember that you, the user, the human, are what's being prioritized. And it becomes an extension of your better self rather than a replacement, as we think AI typically tries to be or is. And so if you can think that if you can remember that it becomes an extension of you, it becomes easier for you to understand how it works and then move forward from there. Great. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Well, it did for me. I'll let you know if anybody tells me it did.
Message me anytime.
Well, Christian, this has been amazing. Long overdue, brother. I'm so glad we were able to connect. What message would you like to leave for listeners in terms of those who might be just beginning their journey with AI?
Yeah, I think more importantly than having empathy for everybody else in the world, I think it's the most important to have empathy for yourself.
Yeah.
To be able to breathe and take a deep breath and remember that if you mess up, guess what? We all messed up. And to remember that we all grew up in the same generations, in the same world, with the same systems. We all of us have said horrible, harmful things about one group of people than others. Nobody's free from that. It doesn't matter how progressive, like even in ways that we may not have ever known, we've done it. And so we have to remember to empathize with ourselves, remember that it is okay to screw up, because the journey of this is to unlearn everything we have learned and relearn something new. Society evolves. And in order to contribute to the evolution of society, we have to grow, we have to unlearn, and we have to relearn. And so if you do that on your own time, as long as you're committed to that and you're willing to accept accountability to the moments when you fall short, and you're able to pick right back up and say, you're right, I messed up, sorry. Now I learned better, now I'm doing better. If that is the framework that you operate in, then you have nothing to fear in this space. And it won't matter because you understand that ultimately you're doing your best.
Yeah.
And that's all anybody can ever ask for, honestly.
Outstanding. Well, how can people follow, support and follow your work?
For sure. So I have Justice AI in its own website and justiceai.co, and they can try it out. They can figure everything out about it right there. It's very easy to jump into, or they can go to modatlasmedia.com/Justice AI, and they can sign up to my Atlas program for monthly, where I communicate with my following every month with blogs and sending them free art and things of that nature. Or they could follow me on LinkedIn, Christian Ortiz with Mod Atlas Media. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram as the real Christian Ortiz. If you type in my name and you type in Justice AI, it's probably impossible to miss me.
Okay. All right. Excellent. And for everybody listening, I'll make sure that all of his, contact info is in show notes, website, all of his hashtags, all that stuff. But Christian, I can't say thank you enough, man. This has been great.
It's been an absolute pleasure, brother. Thank you so much for having me.
The Unbroken Place podcast is presented by Elevate One Consulting. The show is produced by Say Something Studios. Learn more about both of these in the show notes. The show's music is performed by Little Glass Men and Captive Portal. We want to thank you for being a part of the Unbroken Place community. Look for an ongoing conversation on Instagram and Facebook at the handle @UnbrokenPlace. You can also find some helpful resources at eddiepaulthomas.com. Make sure to sign up for our newsletter called OK on Second Thought on LinkedIn. Until next time, one love. At the Say Something Studios division of Elevate One Consulting, we don't just build websites, we craft unforgettable digital experiences. Imagine a place where design, development, UX, SEO, and management harmonize to elevate your brand to unprecedented exposure. A place where your website is not just seen, but felt, experienced, and remembered. Our expert team, equipped with unparalleled marketing insight, turns the everyday task of website design and management into a seamless, empowering journey. With Elevate One, you're not just launching a website. You're embarking on a transformative business adventure. We meticulously design every aspect, from intuitive navigation to stunning graphics, ensuring your digital space authentically represents your business ethos. Ready to transform your online presence into a thriving digital masterpiece? Visit us now at www.elevateoneconsulting.com and start your journey to digital excellence. Elevate One Consulting. Innovate, grow, elevate. Say Something Studios.